Spain conquered the Americas. Gold and silver poured into Seville by the ton. The Spanish crown became the richest monarchy on earth, and then Spain collapsed. 4 bankruptcies in 40 years, a manufacturing sector in ruins, an empire hollowed out from within. The same treasure ships loaded with American silver sailed past a nation falling apart at the seams. The standard explanation blames Spanish kings for spending too much on wars, lazy nobles who refused to work, a culture of honor over industry, religious fanaticism draining resources into cathedrals instead of factories. All of these miss the deeper truth. Spain did not fail despite its silver. Spain failed because of its silver. The greatest treasure extraction in human history became the greatest wealth trap ever documented. 16 million kilograms of silver crossed the Atlantic between 1503 and 1660. The Casa de Contratación in Seville recorded every bar, every coin, every shipment. The archives still exist, the numbers still shock, and the lesson still applies to your world right now. The Spanish experience reveals something uncomfortable about money, resources, and national power. Wealth and power appear identical from a distance. Get closer and you see the distinction. Wealth flows through your hands. Power determines where the flow goes. Spain had wealth. Other nations held the leverage. Other nations controlled the bottlenecks. Other nations built the infrastructure and extracted the value. Spain became a pipe. Silver entered on one end, silver exited on the other. What remained was inflation, debt, and dependency. This is the machinery of extraction operating at continental scale. The Spanish crown sat at the center of a global silver network but controlled almost nothing about how the silver moved, who manufactured the goods it purchased, or where the value concentrated. Foreign bankers in Genoa and Augsburg became the gatekeepers. Dutch and English merchants built the shipping and manufacturing infrastructure. Spanish kings signed contracts paying interest rates so extreme they would make modern loan sharks blush. The treasure made Spain rich. The system made Spain weak. Welcome to Rashi, historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. You live with the consequences of this story. Every resource-rich nation on earth faces the same trap Spain walked into 5 centuries ago. Venezuela sits on the largest oil reserves in the Western Hemisphere and imports food. Nigeria exports billions in petroleum and struggles to keep the lights on. Russia builds its entire economy around hydrocarbon exports and watches the ruble collapse when prices drop. Economists now call this pattern Dutch disease, named after what happened to the Netherlands when North Sea gas revenues destroyed its manufacturing sector in the 1970s. But the Dutch were not the first victims. The Spanish walked this road 400 years earlier. The archives in Seville and Simancas document every step of the descent. The resource curse has a patient 0. You are about to learn its complete history. This story matters because the trap remains open. Nations still fall into it. Politicians still fail to recognize the pattern. Citizens still believe more resources equal more prosperity. The Spanish experience proves this equation wrong in the most documented economic disaster before the modern era. Earl J. Hamilton spent years in Spanish archives during the 1920s and 1930s, compiling over 30,000 commodity prices from markets across Castile, Andalusia, and Valencia. His 1934 book, American Treasure and the Price Revolution in Spain, became the foundation of modern monetary history. The data showed something unprecedented. Prices rose 400% over 150 years. The silver did it. This was the first documented inflation in economic history, and it bankrupted the empire responsible for creating it. The scale of American silver defies intuition. Before Columbus, Europe suffered from a chronic shortage of precious metals. The economy ran on barter, credit, and whatever gold and silver trickled in from African trade routes. Prices remained stable for generations. Sometimes they fell. The medieval economy moved slowly because money itself was scarce. Then Spanish conquistadors found Potosí. The mountain in present-day Bolivia contained the largest silver deposit humans had ever encountered. Native workers, forced into brutal labor through the Mita system, extracted ore from tunnels dug into rock at 15,000 feet above sea level. The altitude killed thousands. The mercury used in refining poisoned thousands more, but the silver kept flowing. By 1600, Potosí had become one of the largest cities in the Western Hemisphere. Population estimates range from 160,000 to 200,000 residents. This mining camp in the high Andes rivaled London and Paris in size. The silver economy built a metropolis in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. The Casa de Contratación recorded 181,000 kilograms of gold and 16,000 kilograms of silver arriving in Seville between 1503 and 1660. These figures represent only the legal registered shipments. Smuggling added perhaps 20% more to the total. The crown took its quinto, the royal fifth, from every shipment. What remained went to merchants, mine owners, and the growing class of colonial administrators. These numbers meant nothing to ordinary Spaniards at first. Silver arrived in Seville. Nobles and merchants spent it on imported goods. The metal dispersed across Europe through trade networks. The process seemed natural. Spain had found treasure. Spain was spending treasure. What harm in this cycle? The harm came slowly, then it came all at once. Martín de Azpilicueta noticed the pattern in 1556. This Salamanca school theologian wrote his Comentario Resolutorio de Cambios while working on questions of church doctrine regarding interest and exchange. His observation became the first documented quantity theory of money in Western economic thought. Azpilicueta noted prices in Spain rose faster than prices in other European nations. He connected this rise to the silver influx. More money chasing the same goods drove prices upward. The logic was simple. The implications were devastating. In France, in Italy, and the German states, silver was scarce. Prices remained lower. Spanish merchants found foreign goods cheaper than domestic production. Why buy Spanish cloth when Flemish cloth cost less? Why purchase Spanish tools when German metalwork offered better quality at lower prices? The arithmetic worked against Spanish manufacturers from the moment the silver ships began regular Atlantic crossings. Spanish prices rose 50% between 1501 and 1550. They doubled again between 1550 and 1600. By 1650, prices had increased 400% from their 1501 baseline. Hamilton documented this rise across every commodity class: grain, meat, textiles, metal goods, construction materials, wages. Everything cost more in Spain than in competing European economies. Manufacturers faced an impossible choice: pay higher wages to workers demanding compensation for rising living costs, or watch workers leave for other trades or other countries. Either option raised production costs. Higher costs made Spanish goods uncompetitive in European markets. Uncompetitive goods meant lost sales. Lost sales meant closed workshops. The silver enriched Spain. The inflation impoverished Spanish industry. Economic historians call this period the price revolution. The term captures the scale of disruption, but misses the uneven distribution of pain. Inflation hit Spain first and hardest. Other European nations experienced price increases as Spanish silver spread through trade networks. But Spain absorbed the initial shock. Spanish consumers paid higher prices before anyone else. Spanish manufacturers lost competitiveness before their rivals even noticed the changing conditions. The structural incentives favored extraction over production. A Spanish merchant receiving American silver faced a simple calculation. He could invest in domestic manufacturing. This required building workshops, training workers, purchasing equipment, and waiting years for returns. Or he could purchase finished goods from abroad. Immediate gratification, lower prices, superior quality. The choice was obvious, and it destroyed Spanish industry. Wool provides the clearest example. Spain possessed natural advantages in wool production. The merino sheep of Castile produced the finest fleece in Europe. Spanish wool commanded premium prices in Flemish and Italian textile markets. The raw material existed in abundance, but Spain exported raw wool and imported finished cloth. The value-added manufacturing happened in Flanders, in the Italian city-states, in the emerging English textile industry. Spanish silver paid for this transformation. Foreign workers earned the wages. Foreign merchants captured the profits. Foreign nations built the manufacturing infrastructure Spain neglected. The same pattern repeated across every industry. Spanish iron went to German forges. Spanish leather went to Italian workshops. Spanish agricultural products went to foreign processing facilities. The finished goods returned to Spain at prices only silver could pay. Crown revenues reflected this dependency. Import duties on foreign manufactured goods became a major income source for the Spanish treasury. The more Spain imported, the more the crown collected. This created a perverse incentive at the highest levels of government. Domestic manufacturing threatened royal revenue. Foreign dependency sustained it. Philip II inherited this system when he took the throne in 1556. His father, Charles V, had spent decades fighting wars across Europe, while American silver paid the bills. Philip continued the pattern. The Spanish treasury became a flow-through operation. Silver arrived from America. Silver departed to creditors and suppliers. What remained barely covered administrative costs. The flow of funds tells the true story of Spanish decline. Philip II's government declared bankruptcy 4 times, 1557, 1560, 1575, 1586. Each bankruptcy represented a moment when debts exceeded revenues so dramatically the crown suspended payments to creditors. These were not bankruptcies of poverty. These were bankruptcies of misallocated abundance. Silver kept arriving. The crown kept spending faster than it arrived, and the terms of borrowing grew progressively worse with each default. The Genoese bankers became the primary creditors to the Spanish crown. The Fugger banking family of Augsburg held earlier loans. Both extracted interest rates between 20 and 40% annually. Both demanded collateral in the form of future silver shipments. The treasure became mortgaged before it crossed the Atlantic. This was the extraction machinery operating through financial engineering. Spain controlled the mines. Foreign bankers controlled the crown. The leverage belonged to those who understood credit and debt, not to those who dug metal from the ground. The Fugger family pioneered the model. Jacob Fugger the Rich financed Charles V's election as Holy Roman Emperor in 1519. The loan amounted to 850,000 florins. Repayment came in the form of mining concessions, tax farming rights, and guaranteed access to American silver revenues. The Fuggers understood something the Spanish crown never grasped. Control over money flows mattered more than possession of money itself. A king with 1 million ducats in debts of 2 million remained subordinate to the banker holding the notes. Charles V spent his reign fighting the Protestant Reformation, the Ottoman Empire, and French territorial ambitions. Each war required immediate cash. American silver arrived on an annual cycle. War expenses accumulated daily. The gap between income and expenditure created permanent demand for credit. The bankers met this demand at enormous profit. Interest rates on short-term loans to the crown ranged from 18% to 48% annually. These rates reflected both genuine risk and monopoly power. A king who defaulted might seize assets or expel bankers from his territory. But a king who lost access to credit lost the ability to pay soldiers. Unpaid soldiers mutinied. Mutinies lost wars ended dynasties. Philip II understood this leverage when he declared bankruptcy in 1557, 1 year after taking the throne. He suspended payments to the fuggers and other creditors, forcing renegotiation of terms. The short-term relief came at long-term cost. Future loans carried even higher interest rates. Creditors demanded even more collateral. The cycle accelerated. The Genoese bankers replaced the fuggers as primary creditors during Philip II's reign. These financiers operated through complex networks of bills of exchange, allowing them to move money across Europe without physically transporting precious metals. Their comparative advantage lay in information and relationships, not in accumulated gold. The asiento system formalized the arrangement. An asiento was a contract between the crown and a banking syndicate. The bankers provided immediate cash in one location, typically Antwerp or Milan, where Spanish armies needed payment. The crown repaid the loan, plus substantial interest from future American silver shipments arriving in Seville. The bankers collected in silver. They spent in local currencies at favorable exchange rates. The currency arbitrage added another layer of profit beyond the stated interest rate. Conservative estimates suggest Genoese bankers extracted 30 to 50% annual returns on their Spanish loans during the late 1500s. This was the machinery of financial extraction operating at peak efficiency. The Spanish crown possessed nominal sovereignty. The Genoese bankers possessed structural control over the pressure points in the Spanish financial system. Philip II's bankruptcy in 1575 demonstrated the limits of royal power against banking leverage. The king suspended all payments to Genoese creditors. Trade finance collapsed across the Spanish Empire. Merchants found themselves unable to settle accounts or secure letters of credit. The Army of Flanders went unpaid. Mutinous soldiers sacked Antwerp in 1576, destroying one of Europe's wealthiest cities. The Spanish crown learned a brutal lesson. Defying creditors carried costs beyond lost access to future loans. The entire trading system depended on credit networks the bankers controlled. A king seeking financial independence found himself ruling an economy that had ceased to function. Philip II returned to the negotiating table. The Genoese bankers returned to collecting Spanish silver. The extraction continued. Spanish silver financed the Dutch revolt. This paradox captures the perverse dynamics of the Habsburg economy. Philip II spent billions of ducats trying to suppress Protestant rebellion in the Low Countries. These funds flowed to Spanish and Italian soldiers serving in the Army of Flanders. The soldiers spent their wages on food, housing, weapons, and entertainment. Dutch and Flemish merchants provided these goods and services. The silver changed hands. Dutch rebels captured Spanish ships carrying American treasure. They used the silver to finance resistance against Spanish rule. The more Spain spent on suppression, the more resources flowed to the rebellion. The economic geography created structural advantages for Spain's enemies. The Dutch controlled key trade routes between the Baltic and the Atlantic. Dutch shipyards built vessels faster and cheaper than competitors anywhere in Europe. Dutch merchants established trading posts from Indonesia to Brazil. Dutch bankers developed financial instruments Spanish financiers never mastered. Amsterdam replaced Antwerp as the commercial center of Northern Europe after the 1576 sacking. The Dutch Republic, a small nation fighting for independence against the dominant military power on the continent, became the economic engine of European growth. Spanish silver made this transformation possible. The flow of funds worked as follows. Spain extracted silver from American mines. Spain paid soldiers and purchased supplies for European wars. Soldiers and suppliers spent silver in local economies. Local economies traded with Dutch merchants. Dutch merchants accumulated silver through commerce. Dutch investors deployed silver in shipbuilding, manufacturing, and colonial ventures. The investments generated returns. The returns funded more investment. Spain consumed silver. The Dutch multiplied it. The English followed a similar pattern at smaller scale. English privateers raided Spanish treasure ships throughout Elizabeth Vare's reign. Francis Drake's circumnavigation brought back Spanish silver worth millions. The accumulated loot financed English maritime expansion. English textile manufacturing benefited from Spanish silver flowing through trade channels. Spanish consumers paid premium prices for English cloth. English manufacturers invested profits in expanded production capacity. The English wool industry grew, while Spanish textile production collapsed. This was the resource curse operating across borders. Spain possessed the resource. Competitor nations captured the value. The possession created complacency. The capture created capability. By 1600, the Dutch Republic and England had developed diversified economies with strong manufacturing sectors, sophisticated financial systems, and expanding global trade networks. Spain had silver, debt, and memories of glory. The military implications followed the economic logic. The Dutch achieved effective independence by 1609, though Spain refused formal recognition until 1648. English naval power challenged Spanish dominance in the Atlantic. The 30 Years' War drained remaining Spanish resources in a final attempt to enforce Catholic hegemony over Protestant Central Europe. Spain emerged from these conflicts militarily exhausted and economically hollowed. The silver still arrived, though in declining quantities as the richest deposits played out. The debts remained. The manufacturing capacity never recovered. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 marked the formal end of Spanish predominance in European affairs. Protestant nations had fought Catholic Spain to a standstill, then to defeat. They financed their victory with Spanish silver redirected through commerce and capture. Economists named the pattern in 1977. The Economist magazine coined the term Dutch disease to describe what happened to the Netherlands after discovering North Sea natural gas in 1959. Gas revenues flooded the Dutch economy. The currency appreciated. Manufacturing exports became uncompetitive. Industrial employment declined. The Netherlands developed symptoms identical to those documented in Spanish archives 4 centuries earlier. The resource curse hypothesis followed. Academic researchers demonstrated statistical correlations between natural resource abundance and poor economic performance. Countries with oil, gas, minerals, and other valuable extractive resources showed slower growth, higher inequality, and weaker institutions than resource-poor neighbors. The Spanish case provides the historical template. Every element of modern resource curse theory appears in the 16th century documentation. Currency appreciation and Dutch disease effects operated through price differentials rather than exchange rates. Spanish prices rose faster than European competitors. This real appreciation produced the same result as nominal currency appreciation. Spanish goods became uncompetitive. Imports replaced domestic production. Deindustrialization followed the path economic models predict. Manufacturing capacity declined as resources shifted to extraction and consumption. Skilled workers emigrated or changed occupations. Industrial knowledge disappeared. Recovery became progressively more difficult as the industrial base eroded. Institutional degradation matched theoretical expectations. The Spanish crown developed dependency on extractive revenues rather than productive taxation. This reduced incentives to develop administrative capacity, protect property rights, or invest in human capital. The short-term abundance of silver eliminated pressure for long-term institutional development. Debt accumulation and financial vulnerability echoed modern resource-dependent nations. The expectation of future silver flows allowed unlimited borrowing. The borrowing created dependencies on foreign creditors. The creditor relationships transferred leverage away from the resource-owning nation toward the financial gatekeepers. You see these patterns repeating in your world today. Venezuela nationalized its oil industry in 1976. Oil revenues financed massive public spending throughout the following decades. Manufacturing declined as oil dominated the economy. When oil prices collapsed in 2014, Venezuela lacked the productive capacity to adjust. The economy entered a crisis that continues today. Nigeria exports approximately 2 million barrels of oil daily. Oil revenues constitute over 90% of export earnings. Manufacturing contributes less than 10% of GDP. The pattern matches the Spanish template. Resource abundance, industrial decline, import dependency, institutional weakness. Russia built its post-Soviet economy around hydrocarbon exports. Oil and gas revenues financed government operations and military modernization. When sanctions and price declines hit after 2014, the economy contracted. The manufacturing sector, neglected during years of easy resource revenue, provided no cushion. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf states recognized the pattern and launched diversification initiatives. Vision 2030 and similar programs attempt to build non-oil economic capacity before petroleum revenues decline. These nations study previous resource curses to avoid repeating them. The Spanish experience provides the longest documented case. The lesson from Spanish archives applies to any economy dependent on a single resource or revenue stream. Abundance creates complacency. Complacency prevents investment in productive capacity. When the abundance ends, the economy collapses. Spain never recovered its 16th century position. The manufacturing capacity destroyed by silver inflation never rebuilt. The financial dependency on foreign bankers continued for centuries. The institutional weaknesses persisted through the following 400 years of Spanish history. This is the true cost of the resource curse. The damage extends beyond the immediate economic disruption. It shapes institutions, incentives, and capabilities for generations. The Spanish Empire fell in the 1600s. Spain remained a second-tier European power until the late 20th century. The archives in Seville still hold the records. The Casa de Contratación documented every silver shipment. The Royal Treasury recorded every bankruptcy. The Salamanca school theologians analyzed the monetary dynamics in real time. The evidence exists for anyone willing to examine it. The modern world rediscovered these lessons through painful experience. Venezuela, Nigeria, Russia, and dozens of smaller resource-dependent nations walked the same path Spain walked 5 centuries earlier. The trap remains open. The pattern continues. You now understand why wealth and power diverge. You see how extraction systems transfer value from resource owners to infrastructure controllers. You recognize the role of financial gatekeepers in capturing the profits from commodity flows. This knowledge provides protection. Understanding the Spanish silver curse helps you analyze modern economies, evaluate political claims about resource wealth, and recognize the structural forces shaping global economic competition. The silver still matters. It transformed into oil, gas, and rare earth minerals. The empires changed names. The dynamics remained identical. Those who control the bottlenecks and build the infrastructure capture the value. Those who merely possess the resource become pipes for extraction. Spain had all the silver in the world. Spain lost everything. The historians documented why. Now you know too.